Have you ever had that feeling? When you've got like a big decision to make, but something deep down just isn't sitting right. It's like your logical mind is saying one thing, but then you've got this gut feeling pulling you in a totally different direction.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's like we're constantly told that good decision-making is this purely rational process.
Right.
But in reality, it's so much more than that. I think it's really rooted in our emotions and those gut feelings.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what we're going to be diving into today, exploring this fascinating connection between intuition and confidence.
I love that.
And to help us sort of unpack all of this, we're going to be taking a look at this really interesting conversation between Bradley and Karina,
Okay.
where they really get into the heart of the matter, literally.
Literally, yeah.
They talk about Bradley's Now What project, and Karina's advice kind of leads them into this whole exploration of trusting your heart and following your intuition.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting is how Karina kind of challenges that conventional wisdom that decisions are made primarily in the mind.
Yeah.
She suggests that it actually begins much deeper
Uh-huh.
in the heart or even in the gut.
Okay, so how do we reconcile that with the fact that we always talk about making up our minds?
Well, even Bradley, he points out how instinctively we raise our hands to our heads when we talk about making decisions.
Oh, it's true.
Almost like we're programmed to associate decisions with the mind.
We say things like, I'm trying to decide, and we point to our heads. It's like we're conditioned to think that it's a purely cerebral activity. But Karina is suggesting that something much more nuanced is actually happening.
Yeah, she says that the heart often makes the decision first
Uh-huh.
and then tries to convince the mind
Right.
by using logic and reason.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
Totally.
It's like our heart is sending up a signal flare,
Yeah.
saying this is the way to go, and our mind is left scrambling, trying to catch up and make sense of it all.
Totally, trying to back it up with logic.
But if the heart is already leading the way, why do we often feel so much doubt and confusion when making these decisions?
Well, because, as Karina explains, our minds, they try to filter this intuitive knowing through a lens of pre-existing beliefs and past experiences.
Yeah.
We have all of these mental frameworks and biases that can color our perceptions and make us second-guess those gut feelings.
So it's almost as if our intuition is speaking a different language
Yeah.
that our minds don't always understand.
Totally.
But does that mean that we should throw logic out the window and just blindly follow our emotions?
I don't think so.
No.
Not necessarily. I think it's more about recognizing that intuition holds valuable information,
Okay.
even if it doesn't neatly fit into our rational understanding. And Bradley actually shares a perfect example of this. When he was 21, he moved to Germany for a job that from an outside perspective seemed pretty illogical.
Okay. Tell me more about this. What was it about the move that seemed so counterintuitive?
Well, he ended up living in this tiny room, working incredibly long hours, and feeling constantly exhausted from speaking German all day.
Wow.
Not exactly the glamorous European adventure one might imagine.
Right, but here's where it gets interesting, right?
Yeah.
He was still happy,
Yeah,
like genuinely happy, even though the circumstances were far from ideal.
exactly. And this really underscores Karina's point. Sometimes following your heart leads you to unexpected places.
Yeah.
That might not make sense on paper, but ultimately contribute to your overall journey in ways you couldn't have anticipated.
So in a way, Bradley's experience is like a real-life example of trusting your gut, even when your mind is screaming, no way.
Exactly.
It highlights that listening to our intuition isn't always about making the easiest or most logical choice. It's about aligning ourselves with what feels inherently right, even if the path ahead seems uncertain.
It takes a certain level of courage, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah. To step outside of that comfort zone and to embrace the unknown, trusting that the experience will shape us in ways we can't even fathom right now.
Absolutely. And this concept of embracing the unknown is something that Bradley and Karina connect to the idea of trajectory.
Yeah.
They compare life to a rocket ship's path, where even small adjustments early on can drastically alter the final destination.
Right, like that tiny course correction.
Yeah,
That could send a rocket to Saturn instead of Jupiter.
exactly. And in Bradley's case, that move to Germany, despite the challenges, completely shifted his trajectory.
It did.
It opened up doors and opportunities that wouldn't have been available otherwise.
Absolutely.
This reminds me of something that Karina said about trusting the process.
Yes.
Can you tell me more about that?
Well, Karina actually tells a story about how an unfortunate car breakdown led to a serendipitous encounter with her future husband.
What?
Oh.
Car breakdown led to love. Tell me more about this Antwerp story.
So she was invited to a tennis tournament by a colleague and had initially made it clear that their outing was purely platonic.
Well,
Just friends, she'd said. But as fate would have it, on their way back from the tournament, her colleague's brand new car suddenly breaks down.
oh no. What happened next?
Well, they're forced to stay overnight in this fancy five-star hotel. Talk about an unexpected turn of events.
Yeah.
And to make things even more surreal, the next morning they discovered that the car trouble was just a faulty warning light.
Oh, wow.
There was actually nothing wrong with the car at all.
That's almost too good to be true. Sounds like something straight out of a movie.
Even Karina admits it seems like a scene from Hollywood.
Wow.
But this twist of fate, it led to a much deeper connection. And a few weeks later, her colleague confessed his feelings for her, and they've been happily married for 35 years.
That's incredible. But what does this story tell us about trusting the process?
Well, what's fascinating is that Karina initially hesitated to even invite her colleague to the tournament at all, but something told her to go for it, even though she'd labeled it as just friends.
Right.
And that seemingly insignificant decision, coupled with this unexpected car breakdown, completely changed the course of her life.
So it's not just about trusting our initial instincts, but also trusting the unexpected turns that life throws our way.
Exactly. Karina's story is a powerful example of how surrendering to the process, even when things don't go according to plan, can lead to beautiful and unforeseen outcomes.
Okay, so we've talked about following your heart, trusting your intuition, and the unexpected ways our choices can shape our trajectory.
Yeah.
But where does confidence fit into all of this? I mean, it takes a lot of confidence to go against what your logical mind is telling you, right?
That's a great question, and it's something that Bradley specifically asks Karina about.
Okay.
He's curious about the link between confidence and trusting your gut.
So what's the connection? How do we develop that deep-seated confidence that allows us to trust those inner nudges even when they seem irrational?
Well, Karina explains that confidence is actually built upon past experiences where trusting your heart led to positive outcomes.
Okay.
Every time we listen to our intuition and things work out, even in small ways, it reinforces our belief that we can trust ourselves.
So it's like a positive feedback loop.
Exactly.
The more we exercise our intuition and see those positive results, the stronger our confidence becomes.
Precisely. And that confidence, in turn, empowers us to take more risks, to step outside those comfortable boundaries, and to follow that inner compass, even when the path ahead is a little unclear.
It's like this beautiful cycle.
It is.
Trusting your intuition leads to positive outcomes, which fuels confidence, which then allows you to trust your intuition even more deeply. But what about those of us who might be feeling a little less confident? What if we haven't had those big defining moments that solidify our trust in our intuition? How do we even begin to build that trust?
That's a great question, and it's something we'll delve into deeper in the next part of our deep dive. We'll explore some practical techniques Karina suggests for cultivating trust and confidence in your intuition, even if you're starting from scratch.
Sounds good. Can't wait to hear more about that.
We'll be back soon with part 2 of our deep dive into intuition and confidence.
Stay tuned. You won't want to miss it. Welcome back to our deep dive into intuition and confidence. We've been exploring some really interesting ideas about how decisions are often made from the heart, not just the head, and how trusting that inner voice can lead us in unexpected, yet ultimately fulfilling directions.
It's been quite a journey so far, hasn't it?
It has.
We've talked about the power of those gut feelings, the importance of embracing the unknown, and how even seemingly insignificant choices can have a ripple effect on our lives.
Yeah, it's like realizing we have this internal compass.
Right.
It's always pointing us towards our true north, even when we're not consciously aware of it.
Exactly. And that brings us back to a question we left off with. What about those of us who are still struggling to connect with that inner compass? What if we haven't had those big aha moments that make us think, wow, my intuition was right?
I think a lot of us can relate to that feeling of uncertainty. Like, okay, I get the concept of intuition, but how do I know if I can actually trust mine?
Right.
What if I'm just mistaking wishful thinking for genuine guidance?
Yeah, that's a really valid concern, and Karina addresses this directly in her conversation with Bradley. She acknowledges that building trust in your intuition is a process, especially if you haven't had those clear-cut experiences that validate its power.
So where do we even begin? How do we cultivate that trust, even if we're starting from scratch?
Well, Karina suggests focusing on small, everyday decisions as a starting point.
Okay.
She says it doesn't have to be this massive, overwhelming leap of faith. It's about tuning into those subtle nudges we get and making conscious choices to act on them.
Can you give us an example of what that might look like?
Absolutely. Imagine you're browsing through Netflix, overwhelmed by choices. Instead of just scrolling endlessly, try noticing if you feel drawn to particular genre or title. Maybe you're usually a sci-fi fan, but suddenly you have this urge to watch a romantic comedy.
Okay, so I notice that urge. What do I do next?
That's where the trust comes in. Instead of dismissing that feeling, choose to honor it. Put on the rom-com, even if it feels a little out of character for you. You might discover you needed a good laugh, or maybe there's a message in the film that speaks to your current situation.
So it's about paying attention to those subtle whispers of intuition and then having the courage to act on them, even if they don't make logical sense at first.
Exactly. And the more we practice this, the more attuned we become to our inner voice. Karina uses a great analogy of a 3D printer slowly building a structure, layer by layer. Each time we listen to our intuition, no matter how small the decision, we're adding another layer to the foundation of our trust and confidence.
That's a really helpful visual. It's like we're slowly building a bridge to our desired outcome, brick by brick, trusting that each step will bring us closer to where we want to be.
And this approach is especially helpful when dealing with that nagging voice of doubt that so often creeps in. By breaking down those larger goals into smaller, more manageable actions, we're less likely to feel overwhelmed and more likely to stay motivated.
That's about creating momentum, right? Each small win fuels our confidence and propels us forward. But what about those times when our minds are just racing with anxiety about the future? How do we stay present and focused on those smaller steps when we're feeling overwhelmed by those what-if thoughts?
That's a common struggle, and it's something Karina addresses directly. She emphasizes the importance of staying present throughout this process. She reminds Bradley and us listeners that worrying about the future only creates unnecessary anxiety and often prevents us from taking action.
So it's like that what-if thinking becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy, keeping us stuck in a cycle of fear and indecision.
Exactly. And that's why Karina offers a simple yet profound tool for combating this anxiety. Asking ourselves, right now, in this moment, am I okay?
Hmm, that's such a grounding question.
It is.
It brings us back to the present moment and helps us recognize that in this very instant, we have everything we need.
Right.
We are okay.
We are.
And from that place of groundedness and presence, we can make choices that are more aligned with our hearts, trusting that the future will unfold as it should.
It's about shifting our focus from the what ifs to the what is, trusting that we have the strength and resilience to navigate whatever challenges or opportunities might arise.
And as we've discussed, that trust is cultivated through experience. Through those moments where we take a chance on our intuition and witness those positive outcomes, it's a cyclical process, this beautiful dance between trust and confidence.
It is. But what happens when we feel torn between what our head is telling us and what our heart is whispering?
Right, like what if our logical mind is screaming no, while our intuition is nudging us forward? How do we discern between those fear-based warnings and the genuine guidance of our intuition?
That's a question many of us grapple with, and it's one of the trickiest aspects of navigating this inner landscape.
Yeah, it's like this internal tug of war.
Yeah,
And it can be really difficult to know which voice to follow.
absolutely. And there's no one-size-fits-all answer, but Karina and Bradley do offer some valuable insights into this dilemma.
What kind of insights? How can we start to tell the difference?
Well, they both acknowledge that our minds, often shaped by past experiences or societal conditioning, might try to steer us away from paths that feel risky or unconventional. It's like our minds are trying to protect us from potential disappointment or failure, but in doing so, they might also be limiting our growth and potential.
So how do we discern between those fear-based warnings from our minds and the genuine guidance of our intuition?
Karina suggests paying attention to the energy behind each voice. Fear often feels constricted, heavy, and anxious. It's that feeling of, I shouldn't do this, something bad might happen. On the other hand, intuition tends to feel more expansive, light, and even a bit exciting, even if it's tinged with uncertainty. It's more like, this feels right, even though I don't know exactly why.
So it's about tuning into that subtle difference in feeling,
Yeah.
right? Noticing how each option resonates within our bodies, not just in our thoughts.
Exactly. And this requires a willingness to slow down, to create space for stillness and reflection, to really listen deeply to those whispers of wisdom that might otherwise be drowned out by the noise of our thoughts and anxieties. It's about creating a sacred space within ourselves where our intuition can be heard.
That makes so much sense. It's like turning down the volume on all those external distractions and tuning into our own internal frequency. But even when we can hear that inner voice clearly, it still takes a certain level of courage to act on it, especially when it's leading us in a direction that feels unfamiliar or uncomfortable.
Absolutely. It takes courage to trust those subtle nudges, especially when they go against what our logical minds deem safe or sensible. It's about daring to step outside those comfort zones, to embrace the unknown, and to trust that we have the inner resources to navigate whatever challenges might arise along the way.
And as we've seen in both Bradley and Karina's stories, those acts of courage often lead to the most incredible and fulfilling experiences. Their journeys remind us that sometimes the most unexpected detours lead to the most beautiful destinations.
Precisely. And that brings us back to that concept of trajectory. Each decision we make, no matter how seemingly insignificant, has the potential to alter our course in profound ways. It's like we're constantly weaving a tapestry of our lives, thread by thread, choice by choice, and the beauty lies in embracing the mystery of the unfolding pattern.
I love that analogy. It really captures the essence of this whole exploration of intuition and confidence. It's about trusting the process, embracing the unknown, and having the courage to follow those inner whispers even when we don't know where they might lead.
Beautifully said. And speaking of those inner whispers, in the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore some practical techniques and tools that can help us strengthen our intuitive muscle and cultivate that unshakable confidence that allows us to live a life aligned with our heart's truest desires.
Sounds fascinating. I'm ready to dive even deeper.
We'll be back soon for the final part of our exploration.
Don't go anywhere. All right, so we're back and ready to wrap things up with part 3 of our deep dive into intuition and confidence. And I got to say, I'm pretty excited about this part because we're going to get practical. We've been talking about trusting your heart, embracing the unknown, and we've heard all those incredible stories from Bradley and Karina. But how do we actually make this stuff work in our own lives?
Yeah, it's one thing to talk about it, right? It's like
Yeah.
we've been given this amazing map, but now we need to learn how to read it.
Exactly. So what are some of those tried and true techniques for actually honing those intuitive abilities?
Well, one of the most effective, and it's one that both Bradley and Karina emphasize, is the practice of mindfulness.
Okay.
And it's all about cultivating this present moment awareness, quieting those racing thoughts, and creating space for our inner wisdom to emerge.
Mindfulness. I feel like we've all heard the word, but what does it actually look like in practice?
It's about shifting our focus from that constant chatter in our heads to the sensations in our bodies, the feelings in our hearts, and even the subtle energies that surround us. Instead of getting swept away by thoughts, we become more aware of what we're feeling in each moment.
So it's about being present in our bodies and tuning into those subtle feelings rather than getting lost in that whirlwind of our thoughts.
Precisely. And there are so many different practices that can help us cultivate mindfulness. Meditation is a great one, as is yoga, or even just spending time in nature. Anything that helps you connect with the present moment and kind of quiet the mind.
I've tried meditation before, but honestly, I really struggle to sit still and clear my mind. Are there any other ways to kind of tap into that mindfulness? Maybe something a bit more active?
Absolutely. Even something as simple as taking a few deep breaths before making a decision can be incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
Just pausing, breathing deeply, and noticing how your body feels.
Yeah.
It can create a sense of calm and clarity, allowing your intuition to speak more clearly.
Okay. Deep breaths. Got it. What else? Karina mentioned something about journaling. How can that help with intuition?
Journaling is a great tool, though it does require, some commitment to really reap the benefits. Think of it as creating a dialogue with your inner self. It's a safe space to explore your thoughts and feelings without judgment, to track those intuitive nudges you receive, and notice any patterns or recurring themes that might be guiding you.
Yeah, I like that. It's like we're documenting those whispers of intuition so we can start to recognize their language and their patterns.
Exactly. And over time, as you become more familiar with your inner landscape, you naturally start to trust those intuitive insights more readily.
I can see how that would be helpful. It's like building a bridge of understanding between our conscious and subconscious minds. Speaking of the subconscious, I remember Bradley and Karina briefly mentioning something about dreams.
Ah, yes. Dreams. They can offer a wealth of symbolic language and intuitive guidance.
It can.
But deciphering those messages can be a bit like learning a new language.
Yeah, I've always been fascinated by dreams, but they often feel so elusive and hard to grasp. Any tips for working with dreams to enhance intuition?
Well, the key is to pay attention. Keep a dream journal by your bed, and as soon as you wake up, jot down as many details as you can remember. Don't worry about making sense of it right away. Just capture those images, feelings, and any words or phrases that stand out.
And then what? How do we start to make sense of those dream symbols and messages?
Well, start by noticing any recurring themes or symbols. Maybe you keep dreaming of water or flying or being chased. Explore what those symbols might represent to you in your waking life. There are also plenty of dream dictionaries and online resources that can help you interpret those common dream symbols.
That makes sense. It's like those dreams are little puzzles waiting to be solved.
Right.
And each piece we unlock reveals a bit more about ourselves and our path. So we've got mindfulness, journaling, and dream work. Any other techniques we should add to our intuitive toolbox?
One that often gets overlooked, but that can be surprisingly effective, is simply asking for guidance.
Guidance from whom? Like, are we talking about praying?
Well, not necessarily. It's more about acknowledging that there's a wisdom that extends far beyond our limited human understanding. Whether we call it our higher self, our intuition, the universe, or something else entirely, there's a source of guidance that's always available to us.
So it's about tapping into something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah.
A source of wisdom that can offer guidance and support. How do we actually do that?
It starts with intention. Set aside some quiet time, connect with your breath, and simply ask for guidance on a specific question or situation. Be open to receiving those insights in whatever form they may come.
So it sounds like this is about cultivating a sense of receptivity, of being open to those whispers of wisdom, however they show up.
Exactly, and this receptivity can extend beyond those quiet moments of contemplation. Start paying attention to the synchronicities in your life, those meaningful coincidences that seem to guide you in the right direction. Notice the signs and symbols that might be pointing you towards a particular path. Be open to those chance encounters that lead to unexpected opportunities.
So it's like the universe is constantly communicating with us, but it's up to us to tune in and pay attention to those messages.
Beautifully said. And that's ultimately what this whole journey of intuition and confidence is about. Cultivating that deep sense of trust in ourselves, in our inner guidance, and in the unfolding of our lives.
It's about remembering that we're not alone on this journey, that there's a wisdom that's always available to us, guiding us, supporting us, and nudging us towards our highest potential.
Absolutely. And as we cultivate that trust, confidence naturally blossoms, empowering us to take those leaps of faith, to embrace the unknown, and to create lives filled with purpose, joy, and fulfillment.
Such a powerful message to end on. This has been such an incredible deep dive into intuition and confidence.
It has.
We've learned about that interplay of the heart and mind, the power of trusting our gut feelings, and some really practical techniques for strengthening those inner muscles.
And now we turn it over to you, dear listener.
Yes. What resonated most deeply with you today? What small step can you take to cultivate more trust in your own intuition? Will you commit to a daily mindfulness practice? Will you start a dream journal? Will you simply pause and ask for guidance? Remember, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Trust your heart, listen to your intuition, and step boldly into the unknown. The adventure awaits.
Until next time, keep diving deep.